Let's look at how we calibrate a capacitance probe. Here we're looking at the final result, and we're going to look at how we got to this point. Note that field capacity is at 100%, which I called total moisture. So 100% total moisture is field capacity. And that is on a scale of 0 to 100, where 0 would be oven dry. So we're going to peg field capacity at 100, and we want to find the point where the sensor is when we have 70% or 30% depletion. And I selected that number purely because it is attainable. You can take any crop down to 70% without hurting it. Yes, it would have been better to go down to 50%. You would have a broader scale to work with, have more accurate calibration. But the grower is not going to go down there just so that you can see what it looks like. You might think you could just choke off the sprinkler at that one tree and let it dry out. That would work, but then having done that, particular probe no longer represents the block. And you don't want to flood the whole block just to get this one back to standard. So I like the concept of working field capacity at 100, take it down to 70, and peg 70 at that point. Now let's look at the raw data. This particular probe has 6 sensors, 100, 200, 300, 400, 5, and 600 millimeters. So that's 2 feet depth. When I click on this tab, I see the raw probe values. Now these probes are factory calibrated between 0 and 100, 0 in air, 100 in water. So this is a loam soil, and we're getting a reading of around about 50 or 50 units sensor value. So that's a reasonable number. It's a good response, and this is a good installation. Now note that at that point we have 50, and we're seeing response down to as low as 43. So that's a 7-point span in there. If we just click through the sensors, here is one that goes from like 50 down to 44. So that's only 5% of 5 units movement. And then, so we get a range depending on the exact soil around the probe at that sensor point. Now, when we start looking at calibration, we want to find the field capacity. And I want to point out something here. Some people are very strict about looking at where the apparent drainage stops. And remember, you can zoom in on this grass with a click and a drag. So left click, top left, drag down and across, let it go, and it'll zoom into that. So on this scale, someone might say field capacity right there where the drainage overnight stops. So I'm going to reset the zoom, and then you get a situation like here. So what is going on here? Where the apparent moisture content goes up in the late afternoon, and it happens every day. Interestingly, if you look at the soil temperature at the top for that same period, you have exactly the same trend. So we have a high temperature late afternoon. So I'm saying what we're looking at here, these bumps are really less than perfect temperature compensation. So I reset the zoom. So don't beat yourself up over it. We have a clear downward trend of soil moisture consumption. We have definite irrigation here, spikes back up, and we go back down. So let's look at the broader trends. We have 2 ways of doing the calibration. So if you look down in the lower left-hand corner, we can go sensor by sensor in detail, or we can use the stacked sensors. So I'm going to click on the stacked sensor, and that will open them all on the same page. What's good about that is that you can see the pattern through the profile. The lines might be very small, and remember right now this is uncalibrated, so the green and the red lines really have no meaning where they are right now. So we're looking for specific trends, and I'm looking for a time where the soil moisture definitely went all the way to the bottom. And here's a good indication right here. So we can, for instance, zoom in on that period, take a good look at it, and let me point out again, right at the top of the screen, we have these 2 buttons. We're going to set a full line, and then we're going to set a 70% line. Those are the 2 limits we want to create. So the button is on for full, so we're going to work with full only, and then we'll come back and do the other one. I have zoomed in, I'm looking at this, and remember you can click as many times as you like. So in this case the red line is in the wrong place, so I'm going to have to set a red line down here first so that I can set a full line there. So I'm going to click a full line, and I realize the same is going to happen with all of these. Okay, so just as well. What we can do here, I want to push the red line down, otherwise I cannot click a green line, which is going to be below the red. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to say drop the red lines to a point which is just way down at 10%. So when I click this, it'll just click them all way down there, and you can see they're almost off the scale, which squeezes up my scale terribly, but this is the peak I was looking at. So I'm going to zoom in, set the green, and I'm going to start by just setting quick green lines so that I can go from there and then zoom in a little. And there are two ways of doing this. You can just do the drag zoom and look at it in more detail like that. I'm going to use the other technique here, and that is I have now selected full lines that are kind of where I want them, and now I'm going to select a 70% line, and I can use this function where I'm saying just set it where we have 70% of the full value. This is more than the typical response that I've been seeing, but it'll put me on a different scale here. And in fact, I'm going to go a little higher. I set that to 80% just to stretch the scale a little. So now I'm looking at this again, and I'm reevaluating the full lines that I set. Let's click that one up a fraction, and I'm going to click this down a fraction. I should be back on full. So don't do what I did. So I'm setting my full lines. And maybe that one wants to be right at the top. And now you've seen the response on these sensors, 5 points, 3 points, and so on. And I have found that a reasonable place to put the 70% line is 80% of the sensor value. So having reset those, I'm going to do this once more. I'm going to set them all to 80, and there has been a movement in here. So these are the values and the responses that I've set up. And if you need to reset this, that little button there that's kind of hidden is the reset button. And so if I bring that back on, you can see what we've done with this calibration. And so we have set the full line relatively accurately. I can go. Okay, I'm going to reset to full here, and I'm going to have one more look at it, fine tune this, look at the responses that I'm seeing, and do one final pass on my field capacity lines. Okay, so we have a setup that is reasonably well suited to this. Now, if you've made any kind of change like this, you need to click this button to make this calibration as permanent. And that will reset them all, create a graph that looks like this calibrated graph. So when I click on the back button here, it's going to take me back to my calibrated graph based on the work that I've just done.